Well, we can now talk to our guest. I can't quite remember which studio he is, Patrick Minford. Can you hear us now? You're in Cardiff. Patrick Minford.
I can, Joe, yes.
Your report today says unskilled immigrants cost £6.6 billion a year. But this is based on families of 4 with a stay-at-home mother. Do you know many families of 4 unskilled migrants with stay-at-home mums in the UK?
Well, it's an illustrative figure, really. The basic point is that it costs about best part of 30,000 for that particular family type. If an unskilled worker brings in a mother, the rest of the family, and it's got 2 kids and a mother, it's 30 grand. Of course, it can be different, it can be less, it can be more. The whole point is that if you're an unskilled worker, you don't pay much tax, and you often get tax credits. Of course, if you get a family, you get a lot of tax credits. So your contribution to the exchequer is probably negative. And then you impose the costs of health, education, and housing on us, the other taxpayers, and of course particularly on the local communities who have to endure these costs locally rather than nationally. So of course it's very easy for the rest of us to say, oh, it's very nice to have cheap labour and so on. The costs are borne by these local communities, and that's why they're angry.
But it's your figures that we're looking at, because you seem to be saying that you've based the figures, the numbers of unskilled migrant families with stay-at-home mums, on the UK average household composition. I mean, most people would agree that the two are not comparable.
Well, we don't know exactly, unfortunately.
Right, but if you don't know, why have you used it as an illustrative figure?
Well, because we have 28% single, and then the rest are family, and we average them. Of course, it can be a smaller number, it can be a larger number. The point is, though, that under the facts of our welfare system are that you get much more than you pay in. If you had a family of 1 kid, it'd be the same. If you have, a family of if you only have one and a non-working mother, you get tax credits.
Right.
Unfortunately, that's the point, the facts of our welfare system. The basic point, Joe, is that if you have a welfare system, you act as a magnet for unskilled workers if you also have a high level of employment, full employment, and an economy that's doing well when the rest of Europe's doing badly.
All right, well, let's look at those figures again, because you're then assuming that 3/4 of farm workers, labourers, care helpers who come here come with their partner and 2 children, or that individual unskilled migrants who are usually young and fairly fit cost the NHS £2,120 a year. Are you really saying that those people cost our health service that much money every year?
Well, it's an average, isn't it? There's A&E, there's childbirth if you've got a family, if you have kids.
But there are a lot of ifs, aren't there?
Well, the point is that we don't really know exactly, but what we do know is that this welfare state, and this is why, of course, Australia has a green card system and it doesn't let in unskilled workers. Or if they do let in unskilled workers, they don't let them in with dependents because they cost so much to the welfare state. This is the fundamental point. And that's why, of course, we could get lots and lots of unskilled workers. And there's a further point that they put a depressive effect on the local wage in the local economy,
right,
which again is a factor that's very unpopular, naturally, with the people in those areas.
All right.
And so you've got a package here that is damaging to poor people and is not damaging to richer people and those with privilege.
Right, well let's get your response, Carolyn Fairbairn, because one of the things Patrick Minford's saying is that actually they aren't paying in as much as they are taking out, whereas the overall contribution to the country from EU migrants, certainly according to a lot of the studies done, certainly in taxes paid, is greater than the amount they take out.
I have to say, where I agree with Patrick is, there are local issues, and we accept that. But this is a highly misleading analysis, I think, in terms of the kind of natural family composition we see. I think we know from experience that it's not a family of 4 who's the typical model here, and that studies have shown that the net contribution is around about £2.5 billion overall. So I think that these are highly misleading figures. And the other thing I'd really like to pick up on is this point about the depressing of wages. There has been a very detailed Bank of England study done at the end of last year that pulled together all of the different research on this that concluded that the impact of immigration on wages was negligible and close to zero. So I have to say, I think this is just not helping or adding or clarifying this important debate at all.
Right, Patrick Minford, before you report, can I just say, I mean, low-skilled Brits surely should be more worried by the claims of all the supermarket bosses and Usdaw that leaving the UK would force prices to rise for them than they should be about your illustrations of how much they may have depressed wages or not.
Well, I think that they're both of a concern, and what we've shown is that if you go to free trade and you have competition in the supermarket and you get rid of the common agricultural policy and the protectionist policies of the EU, you bring prices down massively. What they're talking about is a temporary effect on the exchange rate of the way the economy reacts to Brexit, which is a completely different matter. And so if they look at the matter in the terms of the living standards of people after the adjustment has come through, they go up. And that's what, of course, they haven't done. They've just said, they've assumed, like George Soros today, a big policy uncertainty effect on the exchange rate, which is a purely temporary effect. And the exchange rate there is simply stabilizing the economy in a normal way, like it did after we left the exchange rate mechanism.
Right, well, let's put that, I mean, are you worried about that, Tim Montgomery? I mean, George Soros's warning about sterling falling precipitously, I mean, that would have quite a dramatic effect, even if it's in the short term, as Patrick Minford is saying.
Well, I was at the Bank of England, actually. I just joined the Bank of England at the time we fell out of the exchange rate mechanism, and I think you talked about Black Wednesday and Black Friday earlier. Well, a lot of us remember it as White Wednesday, and it was the day a 14-year economic recovery began. And so, look, there will be some uncertainty after we leave.
You accept that?
After we leave the European Union.
But you don't think it's important in of itself?
Well, I think the economy has what the economists call automatic stabilisers. And a small downward movement in the pound actually would help exporters during that period. We don't have an inflation problem at the moment. In fact, we have some risk of deflation. So actually, a more competitive pound would suit the UK economy very well for a period. And once our trade arrangements are stabilised, we can go back to a more normal situation.
Right. Do you agree with that assessment?
It's important to separate two different things here. In terms of the immediate effect on the pound, I think that we can all be. I think that the pound would fall, and there would be a short-term impact.
Would it be as dramatic as George Soros has said? 15%?
I think it could potentially be. There are other projections that have the same kind of levels. HSBC, I think, are forecasting something similar. But I think the more important effect is the longer-term one that Patrick referred to, which is what we might expect in terms of longer-term tariffs and the effect on prices. The Leave campaign is now talking about falling out of the single market and facing WTO-type tariffs. That would increase prices in the long run. And I've talked to a lot of businesses who are concerned about the effect of tariffs on prices and what that would do to...
I mean, you can answer that, Patrick Minford, but also, given that you previously said that we shouldn't be scared if manufacturing is eliminated if we leave the EU, concentrating on other industries, why should any low-paid worker trust you to have their best interests at heart?
Well, low-paid workers, by the way, that's a misquote, as you know very well. What I've said is that manufacturing that's unable to compete in the globalised world
well, you did say would
be
mostly...
eliminated.
Well, let me give you the quote.
I actually made it quite clear that high-tech manufacturing would thrive, and that, of course, is what we're looking for. Our car industry to raise its productivity. It already sells 2/3 of its exports to the world market. Half of our exports go to the world market already. So there's nothing wrong with manufacturing. It can compete, and that's nonsense. It goes up market. That's how it works. And what in fact, Caroline misrepresented us, as the consensus always have on this issue, we're talking about eliminating tariffs here on our imports, which has a massive effect on the welfare of consumers here, and of course is a dynamic for the economy. And as for those tariffs on our exports that the EU may or may not slap on, of course we're going to do a trade deal with them on things like cars, because they won't like the effect of free trade on their car exports to us. So we'll do that. We'll do these trade deals. This is all nonsense.
Right. Well,
what we're going to get is a competitive economy, and manufacturers who are worth their salt will welcome the competition to raise their game.
Well, let me just go back to the quote, since you said that we'd misquoted you. You did say over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, leaving mainly industries such as design, marketing and high-tech. Yes, and I'm just clarifying. And this shouldn't scare us.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I made it perfectly clear, if you read more than one sentence, that the high-tech was accepted and that the way in which manufacturing adjusts is through going up value. That's
Fine.
how the CBI has, that's how the CBI's members have adjusted. That's how the car industry is a world beater in world markets. You know, you're talking in a very negative and sort of narrow-minded way. I was trying to raise our eyes to the idea of global competition across our economy, to the enormous benefit of our consumers, and we can perfectly well help our manufacturers over this rough patch where they've actually got to face global competition in their home market as well.
Right. Do you
why
think,
not?
Patrick,
why not?
All right, well, let me put that to Tim Montgomery. I mean, do you think people working in manufacturing and other low-paid workers should listen to Patrick Minford over Carolyn Fairbairn when it comes to talking about their jobs, long-term prosperity and the future?
I think they should listen to everybody, and they should also listen to...
That's very diplomatic.
They should also listen to James Dyston, you know, one of Britain's most successful ever inventors, or Anthony Bamford, head of JCB, you know, Europe's largest construction manufacturer.
But there aren't many big businesses, are there, backing the Leave
There are
cause?
lots of businesses, lots of small
Big businesses, though, sir.
No, big businesses do very well out of the EU, partly because of the cheap labour and the regulatory regime that the EU offers them. Small businesses who don't trade with the EU still have to put up with a lot of the EU regulation.
Is that
But
the case,
can I
Carolyn, the
just-
small businesses? Let me just answer that and then you can come up.
I think this is just really not true. We have many small members, and they also want to stay the majority. And one of the reasons is that a lot of the regulation you talk about is actually product standardisation. So, you know, talk about it, we have a cheese manufacturer in Somerset who really benefits from the standardisation of cheese standards and packaging and so on. Many, many companies like that. So I think that this idea that somehow it's all about big business is just absolutely wrong, and it's not
all
borne
about
out
big
by
business,
the...
but I don't think the CPI is representative of all of the smaller businesses. And of course, the great opportunity of leaving the EU is 9/10 of our growth in exports is with the rest of the world. Europe is quite a fast declining part of the world.
Is it fast declining? It is going down, is it fast declining?
It's declining twice as fast as America, for example, which is sort of an equivalent advanced.
And what is the level of our trade with the rest of the world outside the EU?
Well, it's about half and half at the moment, but Europe is losing its share. And Europe is unable, because it's 28 member states, can't agree on anything, can't agree on how to solve the euro crisis, can't agree on how to solve the refugee. It also can't agree trade agreements with China or other parts of the fast-growing world. On our own, able to move in a nimble way, we can sign those agreements with the emerging world.
Patrick Minford in Cardiff, as I remembered. Thank you very much for joining us.